Today we're painting the original mermaid, Meet the Manatee. Hello, welcome to Wild Developments. My name is Lauren, and my mission is to help you connect with nature through art, storytelling, and some exploration. Today we are going to learn all about the manatee and do some painting while we're at it. Let's dive in. Materials needed for this project: watercolor paper, our outline. Going to need a palette. We're also going to need paint, pencil, a waterproof pen, brush, masking tape, spray bottle, paper towel, and a container for water. A little bit more in depth about some of the materials. Make sure that you are using a waterproof pen. I'm using the Micron number 8, and this way the line's going to stay put and the ink's not going to get everywhere when we go ahead and start painting. I'm also using a number 12 round brush. It is big enough that we can cover a lot of area, and then also small enough that I can do some of the finer details. For our paper, it is the watercolor paper by Lita Art Supply, and it is a cold press paper, and it is about 25% cotton. It's a real good affordable paper for this project. We're going to be using the light box to trace our manatee today. You're going to place the manatee down on your light box. Use some tape to tape the image down. And then you're also going to tape your watercolor paper on top of that. Once you've done that, you are ready to get to tracing. I am going to fast forward the tracing part, but when you're doing this, make sure you've got nice, clean, dry hands. The oils from your hands, if they get on the page, the paint is going to repel those areas, and you'll see little fingerprints all over your paper. So make sure you got clean, dry hands, and try not to handle it in the areas where you're going to be painting. All right, so now we are ready to paint. If you are using the Lita Art Supply paper, or a paper that is not 100% cotton, I would suggest using the mop brush instead of using the number 12, because we are doing this all in one color for the first layer, and it is such a big area and the paper dries so quickly that I was getting a lot of streaks. So I did have to, when I did my practice run, I had to run this under the faucet and just clean up a bunch of it. And because we're working with Indigo, it stained the paper a little bit, and I was pretty happy with how it ended up looking. And I went in with another layer and added in some detail. So for this round, we're going to try right off the bat with a larger brush. We'll see if that works. If it doesn't, we will do what I did before and just run it under the sink, because it does leave a really cool effect. And you can kind of paint over it and layer really well. So we'll see how it works. We're gonna have to be brave if we put it under the faucet, because I was just about ready to rip it up and completely start over. So I am glad I stuck with it. This one is going to get laminated, and it's going to go down with me to Crystal River and hopefully meet a manatee. So that'll be pretty cool. So this was the practice run. So we're going to be doing the layer of indigo, going back in and doing a little bit of shadowing here, some shadowing there, adding a little bit more detail. When that dries, we're going to do a layer of this algae on the back. They're pretty slow moving and they are in some pretty clear water, so they will get algae that grows on their back. They will get barnacles that grow on their back because they are so slow moving. So we'll do the algae, we'll let that dry, and then we'll go in with a white gouache and add some of those lines, reflections from the water. So we're adding lots of details to our manatee friend. Also, the paper was warping because it is going to get wet along the majority of the paper. So I am going to, I can talk. I am going to use a piece of cardboard that's a little bit bigger than the size of my paper. I'll just flip it upside down and tape the back on the four corners here. So the cardboard that I'm using was from Arches. It was like 10 by 14 or 11 by 14 watercolor paper. And instead of throwing it out, I used it for this project. If you don't have that, you could also use some like Amazon boxes or something like that. You could also use a big clipboard. Just lay down some paper too, so you don't get paint everywhere on your work surface. And what was the other thing you can do to help it from warping? You can tape the outside to the table if you want to. But I like moving my project around. All right, so that is taped and ready to go. I'm going to spray down my colors. I am using a white gouache. I'll be using a Payne's gray for the eyeball a little bit later on. I've got indigo and I also have sap green. But your manatee can be whatever color you want it to be. I thought indigo would be pretty cool. The first time I did this guy, it was a nice bright blue, and I'll show that on the screen there. So it's your manatee, can be whatever color you like. You look at the reference photo, it is more of a light gray color. Oh, I'm already dipping my brush in the water. I'm excited to paint. I gotta spray the paints down first. All right, so I'm just gonna spray down the indigo first. And you can see from before, I made quite a puddle to cover that manatee because that is a large area that we're gonna be covering. So I've got my mop brush wet. And I'm gonna make a nice puddle. Now it is currently pretty milky in consistency, so I'm going to really water it down. So if it's more like a, I'm making a mess everywhere. If it's more like a tea consistency, when it starts to dry, you'll just get some natural blooms and pretty areas. It's getting into my Payne's gray, but that's all right. There wasn't much left anyway. I do like using these big trays because I've got lots of room to mix, and also I can just leave my paint on the tray and come back to it later, and then I feel like I'm not wasting supplies. Speaking of supplies, I need a paper towel. I'll grab that real quick. So this project was a little bit messier than some of the other ones just because we're doing lots of space all at once. Yeah, so this might work out a little bit better than the 12. So manatees are mammals, and you can find them in saltwater areas, but especially this time of year, right now it's February, when it's cold, they will make their way into freshwater springs, especially around the Florida area. These freshwater springs have water that comes up from the ground, and that water is a constant 72 degrees. So they need to be able to stay warm. When the water temperature starts getting around 60, it is no good for our manatee friends. Manatees can weigh up to 3,500 pounds, and they get to be about 10 feet long. So they are a really big animal. And you would think, by looking at them, because they kind of look like giant sea potatoes, you would think that they have a lot of fat stored up in their body, lots of blubber. And actually, they only have, I believe, it's like 3 to 5% of their body weight is fat. So that's why they need to move into areas where it's warmer. And if you look at a dolphin's really sleek looking. And because I'm painting with this mop brush, it is a lot easier to go outside the line. So I have this level lifter. I'm using some clean water and just scrubbing along the end. And it is going to take up the paper a little bit just because of the nature of this paper. It's not 100% cotton. No, it's okay. I'll also try and take a paper towel and get some of those areas. What was I saying? Dolphins. Dolphins look like they're really athletic and really sleek. And actually, they have about 20% body fat. So they've got a lot more body fat than a manatee does, which you wouldn't think by looking at them. The manatees are herbivores, so that means that they eat plants. They specifically like seagrasses. And unfortunately, these guys are threatened, but they are protected by the Marine Mammal Act. So that means if you see them out in the wild, you are not to chase, harass, or touch them. You're also not supposed to give them water. Every once in a while, I'll see videos online of boaters giving manatees fresh water when they're in like salty areas, and you're not supposed to do that. You don't want manatees to associate people with food or water. You are allowed to be in the water and swim with them, but same thing, you're not supposed to touch them, chase them, harass them in any way. I was in Crystal River one year, and there was a woman that full on picked up a baby manatee out of the water, like bear hugging this thing. And thankfully there was a dive boat nearby, and they were able to correct them. I didn't have to do anything, but that is a punishable offense. You could get, I don't know if you'd be arrested, but it would definitely be a hefty fine that you do not want to pay. And really, it is for their protection. They are pretty slow moving when they're swimming around, about 3 to 5 miles an hour. They can do some short bursts of about 20 miles an hour. And because they are mammals and they live in the water, they have to come up and breathe. So when they come up to breathe, they are up at the surface, and they could be vulnerable to getting struck by a boat, and those propellers can really cut them up really, really bad. A lot of manatee rescues that you see, they've been struck by a boat. I'm going to do one more wash, although I do kind of like right there. It looks like a nice highlight. Decisions. I'm thinking I'm going to rinse my brush off just a little bit, so it is still a little see-through as I'm going through and doing this. But I do want to blend this out a bit. They have teeny tiny little eyes, and it's really wrinkly over by the eye, so I'm gonna leave that eye open. You see this paper, when you go back in another time, like it starts lifting. And it is difficult for me to just let it be, so I might have to let it dry and come back to it. It actually was a lot of fun taking the piece underneath the faucet and rinsing it down. I should have filmed it. I was so certain I was just gonna have to throw it away. But that's why it is important to see your piece through to the end, because maybe you learn a new skill, maybe you're able to save it. Maybe once it's dry, you'll like it. Sometimes you gotta step back from it. If you have Arches paper or another paper that's 100% cotton, you will not be having this problem. But I am going to dry this with the hair dryer. We'll see how it looks. And then we'll decide if we run it under the faucet. I'm thinking yes. Just to encourage you guys to try something new. All right, we'll be back. All right, so we're at the sink. I'm just going to, I still have the tape on the back, so that shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to run the water over these areas. And then when I'll try and show you over here, because I got the paper towels right here. Once I'm happy with how it looks, then I'm going to take the paper towels and dry that paper. I'm going to let that sit for just 1 second. I'm going to grab a brush, my number 12 brush, because that has stiffer bristles and it will lift the paint a little bit better. I'm just going over, and it will start to lift that paint. But the indigo, a pretty dark shade, so it does a good job of staining that page. I am going over the eyeball just a little bit. I'm not too concerned about that right now. We will be going over it in a Payne's gray later. You can see how it's been lifting off that page. It's so splotchy right there. It almost looks like it's piebald, if I'm pronouncing that right. But the little splotchy areas like you see on deer, sometimes dogs and horses. It's almost what it looks like. I wonder if manatees can get that. I should look that up later when I'm editing. I did see a post the other day that sharks can have piebald. Which would be really cool to see out in the wild. I'm just getting this blended up as much as possible, because then when we go in again, hopefully it all blends out like the last time. All right, so I'm happy with how that looks. I wonder if you can't really see me over there. I'm going to move this back just a little bit. I'm taking my page, getting a long piece of paper towel, and just pat that dry. Because when we go in to start painting, so we've done a pretty good job of soaking that page. So the water should spread a little bit better when we're painting again, but you want the outside edges on the top to be as dry as possible, because watercolor goes where the water is. The paint flows where the water goes. All right. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay. I've got my clean the table real quick. It's not my table, it's my parents' table. Sorry, Mom and Dad. All right, it's clean, I promise. Okay. So now we're going to go in and do a nice big wash again. We can already pre-soak that paper, so it should not dry out as quickly as it did before. And you still will see everything that we've done underneath, because that's still there. And if you didn't rinse off your manatee, that's fine. You don't have to do this step. If you wanted to go in and do another layer, you could. Just be as careful as you can with those edges. And if you get it outside the edge, just take a quick paper towel to it. Okay. So we got our manatee down. It is a little bit darker along the arms here. So I'm going to go in and just drop in some color and let it spread. Help it look natural. And then also right along like the shoulder area, it's a little bit darker towards the front. Just drop it in while it's still wet. Kind of up here along the mouth. right here, and then it'll just spread out. And then right underneath the chin and the mouth. And if it starts going up above the line of that mouth, you can dry off your brush. Just kind of touch it up. And also around your little nose, it's also a little bit darker. Like a nice U shape. Almost like a little mustache. I'm just kind of doing it in little dots because they've got lots of little pores on their nose and little whiskers that stick out. So, like I said, they are mammals, so they do have hair. Not a lot of hair, but they do have hair in the form of the whiskers. I'm going to grab my smaller brush and add some shadow along the little creases here. And here. And then also don't forget to get around the eye because it is darker by the eye and you want it to spread out. Okay. And this in particular, this manatee, is a Florida manatee. You can find them all along the Atlantic coast up to about New Jersey. And then again along the Gulf from Florida to Texas. They are pretty cool to see out in nature. Right now, since it's been so cold in the US, even all the way down to Florida, Florida had some snow. But there is just tons and tons of manatees in the springs right now, hundreds and hundreds. They post aerial photos looking down over the springs at these guys. And they're all huddled together in that warm water, keeping nice and warm. So my favorite time to go to the springs is not when it's crowded like that with all the manatees. It's got to be a little bit warmer so that you don't have as many manatees everywhere. I like it when it's a happy medium where it is just cold enough that you get a few manatees, but not so cold that they have to shut down Three Sisters Spring. So if there's too many manatees, they don't let people go back into Three Sisters Spring, which Three Sisters Spring is beautiful. We were standing on a paddleboard, I think it was last year or the year before. And usually I'm like down in a kayak or swimming and you don't see it. But when I was on top in the paddleboard, you can see the three areas where they would call Three Sisters. So, all right, we're going to let this dry. And then we will come back in and start adding our details. So I've been touching this area in the corner so you can see how the paint is kind of repelling. But that's okay. Just be careful when you're handling your paper. Okay, now that our manatee is dry, I'm going to go in and do some details with some darker indigo. More of that milky consistency. And I'm just using the tip and I'm going right along these little creases and stuff. They are pretty wrinkly. In fact, they are related to elephants. So if you get a chance to see them on the outside of their arm, their paddle, they have little fingernails and it looks just like elephant fingernails. So it was a pretty obvious outward appearance of how they are related to elephants. Some other ways that they're related, they both have lips that are prehensile, so they have like control over their lips to help them feed. And their teeth are both very similar. Manatees have really dense bones, so they want to be able to pretty effortlessly stay at the bottom to feed, because they're eating seagrass. And also they need to stay at the bottom while they sleep. So they sleep in the water, which is crazy to think about. Do you imagine if humans had to come up to breathe while they were sleeping? And I guess it's something they just don't have to think about, really. I need to make my ocean sounds longer. So they don't have to really think about the breathing, but they're coming up when they're resting about every 20 minutes to breathe. I saw a sailor on YouTube and he was talking about what it's like to sail out in the middle of the ocean by himself. And he did say, depending on traffic in the area, he's waking up about every 10 to 20 minutes. So I guess it's about the same as being a manatee and remembering to breathe. And he's got to get up and make sure he's not hitting other boats. So I'm making this kind of wiggly and wrinkly as I'm doing this. And then I'm also going to go in and do some little dots. Not too many. I don't want to do them all because they got tons. So we're just doing the suggestion of those little dots. And I'm also going to take, I'm also going to get the wrinkles by the eye. It's feeling like it's starting to come together now that we're adding these little details. I think one of my favorite memories swimming with the manatees was being inside Three Sisters Spring. And I didn't see any manatees around. And I'm in water probably about 5 feet deep or so. And I keep hearing this little squeak. And I'm like, what is making a squeak underwater? And the squeaking was getting louder. And then I looked down and right underneath me swam a tiny little baby manatee. And it went over to his mom and then started feeding. And they feed their babies right underneath like their armpit area. And the baby started feeding there. And it was just the cutest thing to see. And I never knew manatees could squeak or even made noises at all. And I will never, ever, ever forget that they make a noise like that. All right, so now I'm going to take more of a tea-like consistency because I'm going to add a little bit of shadow underneath the mouth and underneath the chin and kind of right here by the little paddle. I'm just doing a line of color right underneath the mouth. And then to help soften it up, just some water and help move that down a little bit. I always like softening things up. This helps it make the whole thing look a little bit more natural. So this weekend coming up, so a week from right now, I should be in the water. Hopefully we get to see some manatees. Last year we saw one, maybe two. We were in a different area than we usually go to just because of how crowded it was, and the water was really murky where we were, so it was not the most incredible time in the water with manatees, but it was incredible because we were with a bunch of family. That was a ton of fun. And we're doing the same this year. Gonna add a little bit darker line underneath the mouth and just let that spread. But I have been just outside of Three Sisters some years where it was really crowded, and yeah, you always got manatees swimming by you, and it's just so cool. And they do have volunteers that go out and patrol the area, make sure everybody's doing the right thing. My poor son, he saw trash at the bottom of the water and he dove down to get some trash and he got yelled at by a volunteer, and it's like we weren't trying to chase anybody. There was not even any manatees around at the time. But you're not supposed to dive down. You're just only supposed to float at the top. So I get what she said, what she did, but we're like, do you want this trash out of the water? Because that's another thing that can hurt manatees, is if they eat trash or they get entangled in it. So then she was understanding after that. But, they're dealing with hundreds, if not thousands of people during every shift. So I get why she should be a little on guard. Okay. Now this is looking a little flat, so I am going to go in again and add a shadow. Just along the armpit there. Or I guess shoulder. It's not really the armpit. And then take a clean brush on each side so it spreads out. You can make your manatee as detailed as you want, or if you just want to color it in and kind of call it a day, that's fine too. I like to give people options and explain the options as we go so you can figure out what you want to do. Sometimes I find when I'm teaching a class, people don't want options. They want it to look exactly like the example that they see, which is well and good, but I feel like that kind of sets you up for disappointment if it doesn't look exactly like the instructor's example. So I try and throw a couple different options out. Well, let me know in the comments if you like options or if You just want me to stick to one. You got decision paralysis, which I get. I went over the line, so I'm just gonna very carefully keep going, make it even. And taking a clean brush and helping it spread out. So when Christopher Columbus saw these guys for the very first time, I'm gonna do a little bit right along here too. But Christopher Columbus saw these guys for the very first time, and he famously wrote that these mermaids were not as beautiful as they were originally painted, since in some ways they have the face like a man. I don't think they look like a man at all. A manatee, but not a man. These guys are cute. All right, so while that's drying, I'm going to grab a little bit of my Payne's Gray, clean it off a little bit because it got all crazy with the indigo. Just go in and do the eye. I'm not going to fill it in all the way. I'm going to leave a little bit of white along the edge. Got a tiny little bit of white along the edge. I'll go back in later and add a little dot of white gouache to add some depth to that eye. So next we're gonna take the sap green and I'm gonna spray it down a little bit, but we're going to add the algae on top of our manatee. And you want it to be a nice thick consistency, a little bit thicker than like a milky consistency. And we're gonna dry brush along the edge, and you can see how the paper and the detail in the paper almost makes it look like the algae spots there. So just right up on the top and the edge here, underneath doesn't really see daylight enough to get algae growing on top of it. So just right along there is where we're gonna add the algae. Okay, so it's nice and thick. I really need to grab a dry paper towel. So we're gonna dry the barrel of our brush to make sure we have a nice dry brush going in to do this. I'm just going to hold it right at the base. Try not to remove as much paint as possible. Try and leave as much paint as possible, I should say. And then go in nice and sideways and just kind of scrape it along. And bring it down. Peek at my little reference. If it globs up a little bit more in some areas, that's fine. That would look pretty natural. And the more chaotic it looks, the more natural it looks. Nature isn't always even. Okay. Now that the eye is dry, I'm going to add in a little speck of white gouache to the eye. I'm also going to add a little highlight to the top of the nose, right above the nostril. It's taking me a while to clean that brush because the paint was so thick. And I think because I started painting about, gosh, Connor was going off to kindergarten. So like, what, 15 years ago or so, I was really getting into acrylic on my own. So I started doing acrylics first. So sometimes I do treat my watercolors like acrylic. And you know what? That's a style. Just in a tiny little dot and a little life to his eyeball. And I'm going to go in right above that nostril and in between the first crescent moon shape and that line is where I'm going in. I'm going to dry my brush off a bit and then blend it out because it is just a little highlight. We don't want it to be too bright. And I'm also going to use that white gouache and dot in right at the top where we have those darker dots. Kind of making a little highlight for those. And again, we're not doing every single pour on the manatee. You would never complete your piece. I mean, I guess you would eventually. It would just take forever. So you don't want to do that. Just give the suggestion. Okay. Now I am going to take this and blow dry it and make sure that this is nice and dry before we go in and add some of those little wavy lines for where the water reflection is. Come on. Stop. Okay. So now that everything is dry, I'm going to look at my reference photo and grab some gouache, some of that white gouache, and we're going to add some little wavy lines right on top of our manatee. You don't have to do this step. You don't even have to do the algae part if you didn't want to. Again, if you just want to fill in your manatee and call it a day, you could do that. If you wanted to practice some dry brushing, do that. Now we're practicing adding another layer by adding in some of those wavy lines. And if I was doing this piece as like a commission, or I wanted to sell this, I would spend a lot more time doing every tiny little detail and being precise about it. Just look off the reference photo, eyeball it, and so along the body, I'm seeing a couple lines going this way, and then more towards, so going this way, and then more towards the face. They're kind of almost circular, oval, and just kind of wavy. We're just giving the suggestion that some light is shining down on top of this manatee. So this line right here kind of goes up and down over that round part on the shoulder. We got some lines coming down here. We can just be wavy. We got a line coming here and then kind of going up. Well, that was disappearing really fast. So I'm going to go in and get a little bit more gouache on there. And make sure that it dries. We don't want to be picking up some of that green. I want that to stay underneath. Then some of these came up like this and down like that. We got one coming up over here. Why are you disappearing so fast? Sometimes the gouache likes to disappear really fast. So I'm going to just make sure I get it more of a milky consistency than a tea consistency. And hopefully that'll stick out a little bit more. And then it comes around here a little bit. We've got a line right there. Kind of oval. I'm going to add to those big ovals. Also help it make it look like it's connecting and going up and over the back. I'll just continue this one so it's going over the back. Because in the real world, it would keep going over. I'm also going to do that over here. kind of being wavy with it. Literally. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just giving the suggestion of some little ripples. If you ever get the chance to go to, I guess you can see it in like Crystal River and Three Sisters area too, but Rainbow River, also kind of close to that area. I mean, when that water ripples underwater, it looks like a bunch of little rainbows. The boaters are pretty crazy. So if you are snorkeling or scuba diving, be very cautious. All right. I'm happy with how our manatee friend looks. Congratulations on finishing your manatee. Make sure that you sign your piece. Your piece is never complete until it is signed, and when it is, there is no more touching it. It is complete. Congratulations again. If you learned something about manatees or painting, please let it inspire you to do something for nature. And until next time, get outside, see what develops, and stay wild.